Chris stood before the cracked mirror in the dim dressing room, barely recognizing the battle-worn fighter staring back. The scars and bruises mapped his journey, each a mark of survival, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just another fight, it felt like the last. A quiet knock pulled him from his thoughts. Ashley stepped in, concern in her eyes as she studied him. She knew him too well to be fooled by forced confidence. He could see the worry on her face, but words felt useless. The truth weighed heavy. His body wasn't the same. The speed, the sharp reflexes, the fire that had once driven him forward, it was all fading. He sat on the wooden bench, fists clenched, acknowledging a reality he had tried to ignore. Ashley stayed by his side, a silent source of strength. She had always believed in him, even when he doubted himself. A sharp knock signaled it was time. Taking a deep breath, he stood, straightened his gloves, and walked out. The roar of the crowd grew louder with every step down the long, shadowed corridor. Adrenaline drowned out the fear, the exhaustion, the creeping doubt. Under the bright arena lights, cameras flashed, and voices screamed his name. The fight was brutal. His opponent was young, fast, relentless. Chris struggled to keep up, each blow reminding him of the toll the years had taken. Pain blurred into instinct, his body running on muscle memory alone. The crowd was on its feet, the tension electric. Breath ragged, body aching, he pushed forward. Then came the opening he had been waiting for. Summoning every last ounce of strength, he landed a final, crushing blow. His opponent hit the canvas. The referee counted. The bell rang. Victory was his. But as the cheers erupted, a sharp, searing pain shot through his head. The world tilted. He barely made it to the corner before collapsing against the ropes. The next moments blurred. Doctors, flashing lights, muffled voices. Hours later, clarity returned just long enough to hear the words that shattered everything. His career was over. The damage was too severe. Another fight could cost him his life. In an instant, the world he had built crumbled. Days passed in a haze of silence. He barely moved, barely spoke, lost in the weight of his own emptiness. Ashley stayed, but nothing reached him. The fight had defined him, given him purpose. Without it, he was nothing. Weeks turned into months. Darkness settled in, a heavy force dragging him under. Then, one morning, something shifted. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, cutting through the void. He sat up, staring at the golden streaks on the floor, and realized he had a choice. He could let this destroy him, or he could fight. This time, for himself. Ashley noticed the change immediately. Chris sat in silence, lost in thought, until Ashley gently placed an arm around his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose returning. He could no longer fight in the ring, but he could shape the next generation of champions. Seeing the determination in his eyes, Ashley knew the man she had fallen in love with was back. Determined, Chris poured everything into opening his own gym. It wasn't just about fitness. It was about giving young fighters a place to belong, a chance to chase their dreams. The first weeks were brutal. Renovations, equipment purchases, endless paperwork. He worked from dawn until late at night, exhaustion weighing on him, but for the first time since his career ended, he felt alive. Ashley stood by his side, handling finances and helping wherever needed. When the doors finally opened, Chris stood in the center of the gym, a deep sense of pride filling him. Young fighters trickled in, some unsure, others hungry for a second chance. He saw himself in them, the same doubts, the same fire. His training was intense, pushing not just their bodies, but their minds. Strength alone wasn't enough. They needed discipline, confidence, and resilience. Among them, Jake stood out. Tall, strong, with lightning-fast reflexes, he had raw talent, but struggled with control. He fought with emotion rather than strategy, a weakness Chris knew could destroy him. Seeing potential, Chris took him under his wing, guiding him not just as a coach, but as a mentor. The gym thrived faster than expected. Word spread, and soon, Chris wasn't just known as a former boxer, but as a coach who could inspire greatness. Yet doubt still lingered. Could he truly lead these fighters? Could he turn Jake into a champion? Late at night, alone in the empty gym, he stared at the heavy bag, realizing his new ring wasn't confined by ropes. It was the lives of those who trusted him. He vowed never to let them down. One evening, after an exhausting day, a newcomer entered. He carried himself like a boxer. Steady stance, sharp gaze. Chris, intrigued, asked how he could help. Introducing himself as Tom, the young man explained he had fought professionally until an injury forced him out. Instead of giving up, he dedicated himself to coaching. training under some of the best on the East Coast. Chris listened carefully, sensing something familiar in Tom's story. He asked questions, testing his knowledge. And with each answer, it became clear Tom wasn't just looking for a job, he was looking for a fresh start. When asked why he had come to this city, Tom simply shrugged, a hint of sadness in his smile. "Sometimes," he said, "you have to leave everything behind and start over." Chris understood those words better than anyone. He nodded, offering a small smile. "Come in tomorrow morning. Let's see what you can do." For the first time in years, he wasn't doing this alone. Tom arrived at the gym at sunrise, an hour before training began. Without hesitation, he started setting up, organizing equipment, checking the punching bags, ensuring everything was in place. As the first students trickled in, Chris observed him closely. Tom had a natural ability to connect with the young fighters, explaining techniques with confidence while adapting his approach to each individual. Even with the more difficult students like Jake, he remained patient yet firm. By the end of the day, Chris was sure he had made the right choice. Tom not only had skill, but also an instinct for teaching. He noticed Jake's raw talent and acknowledged the challenge of coaching someone so impulsive. Chris agreed. Jake was his best student, but needed discipline. Together, they could refine him into a champion. The gym, which had started as a dream, was becoming a true training ground for future fighters. Tom's presence played a major role in that transformation. With their shared goal of shaping young boxers, Chris began to look toward the future with real hope for the first time in years. One afternoon, Ashley decided to surprise Chris with lunch. Knowing how he often skipped meals, she packed his favorite roast beef sandwiches, fresh salad, and homemade lemonade. As she arrived at the gym, she paused at the entrance, taking a moment to smooth her hair and collect herself. Stepping inside, she was immediately immersed in the sounds of training. Punching bags thudding, jump ropes whirring, determined voices echoing through the space. She spotted Chris in the far corner, guiding a student through a drill. The moment he saw her, his stern coaching expression softened into a warm smile. As he walked toward her, she playfully revealed the basket, knowing he had forgotten to eat again. They settled on a bench near the wall where she laid out the food. Tom approached hesitantly, noticing Ashley for the first time. Chris introduced them, and Ashley immediately sensed his sincerity. He carried himself with quiet confidence, and something about his demeanor earned her trust. As they shared lunch, she learned more about Tom's past, his struggles, his decision to leave behind his boxing career, and how training others had given him new purpose. Tom admitted he was grateful to have found the gym and Chris as a mentor. Ashley, proud of her husband, acknowledged how he had always believed in others, even when they doubted themselves. Tom, not used to praise, shifted uncomfortably but couldn't hide his appreciation. After lunch, he returned to training, and Ashley turned to Chris with a knowing smile. She liked Tom. He had the potential to be more than just an assistant. Chris agreed. Together, they could take the gym to new heights. As Ashley left, she felt lighter, reassured that Chris had found his path again. Watching her go, Chris reflected on how life had brought the right people into his world at the moments he needed them most. Later that evening, he thought back to the night he first met Ashley. It had been after a grueling fight, his body sore, his mind clouded with exhaustion. He walked into a quiet bar, seeking a drink and a moment of escape. The warm lighting and soft music made the place feel inviting, but it was Ashley who caught his attention. She stood behind the bar, laughing as she spoke with a customer, her smile so genuine that, for a second, Chris forgot his pain. When their eyes met, something shifted inside him. She greeted him with the same warm expression and asked for his order. He requested whiskey, and she poured it without breaking eye contact. Sensing the weight of his day, she asked if it had been tough. "No more than usual," he had answered with a smirk. Her name was Ashley. She was new to the job, and as they shook hands, Chris knew, without quite understanding why, that his life had just changed forever. Chris hadn't planned on becoming a regular at the bar, but after that first meeting, he found himself returning night after night. At first, he convinced himself it was just a comfortable place to unwind, but deep down, he knew the truth. He came for Ashley. Their conversations stretched longer each evening, flowing effortlessly from lighthearted banter to deeper confessions. She spoke about her dream of opening a small restaurant, her love for traveling, and her knack for finding humor in any situation. Chris, who had always been guarded, felt himself opening up in ways he never had before. Before he realized it, Ashley had become the most important person in his life. They spent evenings walking through the city, talking about everything and nothing. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his best friend, the one person he trusted completely. One night, as they sat on his rooftop gazing at the stars, he finally admitted what had become obvious. He couldn't imagine life without her. Ashley, her eyes shining, told him she felt the same. Their love burned fiercely, passionate, intense, sometimes turbulent, but always real. And when Chris's career ended abruptly due to injury, Ashley was the only thing keeping him from sinking. The loss of boxing shattered him, but she refused to let him spiral into despair. Every day, she reminded him he still had a future, still had strength left in him. One night, when he lay awake, drowning in doubt, she whispered, "You're stronger than you think." Her belief in him never wavered, even when he had none left in himself. Months later, as he started rebuilding his life, he knew he wanted to take the next step. On a quiet evening by the river under a sky full of stars, he got down on one knee. With a trembling voice, he told her that she had saved him, that she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. When she nodded, eyes brimming with tears, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Their wedding was simple but perfect, filled with love, surrounded by family and close friends. With Ashley by his side, Chris found new purpose. She wasn't just his wife. She was his foundation, his second chance, the reason he believed in himself again. Their early years together were some of the happiest. They rented a small house near the gym, filling it with laughter, shared dreams, and quiet moments of comfort. Ashley became an integral part of his work, handling finances, organizing schedules, and creating a welcoming environment. Though she knew little about boxing, her presence in the gym was invaluable. She understood people, and her warmth made every student feel like they belonged. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Mornings spent making breakfast together, workdays filled with challenges, and evenings spent wrapped up in each other's presence. She was always there, supporting him through every setback, reminding him of his own strength. One evening, after a difficult loss at a competition, Chris came home exhausted, feeling like he had failed his students. He sat in silence, staring at the floor, until Ashley sat beside him, taking his hand. She reminded him that victories weren't the only measure of success. He was giving these young fighters something far more valuable: belief in themselves. Her words soothed him in a way nothing else could. Through every struggle, every small triumph, she was there, helping him become the best version of himself. They spent their free time walking in the park, escaping to nature, or simply curled up on the couch, savoring the peace of being together. Ashley wasn't just the love of his life. She was his greatest source of strength. Every year, their bond deepened. Even through disagreements, they never lost sight of what mattered most. Late at night, as Chris watched her sleep, he often found himself silently thanking fate for bringing her into his life. Looking back, he marveled at how a chance encounter at a bar had led to everything he cherished. Ashley had been there through his darkest moments, never letting him fall, never doubting his worth. She was, and always would be, his greatest blessing. Chris had always believed that his relationship with Ashley was unshakable. Over the years, their bond had deepened beyond passion and tenderness. They understood each other effortlessly. Their connection built on trust and shared experiences. They had faced highs and lows together, and he was certain nothing could ever come between them. One evening, after an exhausting day at the gym, Chris came home to the familiar warmth of Ashley's embrace. She greeted him with a smile that instantly eased his fatigue, her cozy sweater and the scent of a home-cooked meal making everything feel right. Over dinner, their conversation drifted to Tom, the new assistant at the gym. Ashley spoke highly of him, noting his dedication and how genuinely interested he seemed in their story. Chris agreed. Tom was a solid addition to the team. Casually, Chris suggested inviting Tom over for dinner. It would be a good chance to connect outside of work, and he knew Ashley enjoyed hosting. She was delighted by the idea and immediately started planning. The next day, she carefully selected fresh ingredients, filling their home with the inviting aroma of roasted meat and baked goods. When Tom arrived that evening, he seemed slightly unsure of himself, holding a bouquet of flowers for Ashley. She accepted them with a warm smile, instantly putting him at ease. The dinner was relaxed, filled with easy conversation. Tom listened attentively as Chris and Ashley shared stories about their journey, how they met, built the gym, and overcame obstacles together. "You two have something special," Tom remarked, admiration in his voice. "Not everyone finds a connection like this." Ashley exchanged a glance with Chris, her expression soft. "It takes trust," she said, "and always being there for each other." After dinner, they continued talking in the living room, discussing dreams and ambitions. As Chris listened, he saw something familiar in Tom, the same hunger, the same drive he had once had. It was clear Tom wanted more out of life, and Chris respected that. When Tom finally left, Ashley sighed contentedly. "I'm glad we invited him," she murmured, resting her head against Chris's chest. "Yeah," Chris agreed, holding her close. "He's a good guy." At first, he was happy that Ashley had taken an interest in the gym. She visited more often, engaged with the students, and helped organize events. It felt like they were even more connected. But gradually, something shifted. Ashley's focus on Tom became more noticeable. She frequently asked about his progress, his past, his ambitions. Whenever he entered the gym, her energy changed. Her eyes lit up, her laughter came easier, and she seemed more engaged. Chris told himself it was nothing, just friendly interest. Tom was easy to talk to, and it wasn't unusual for Ashley to be warm toward people. But then the invitations started. At first, the occasional dinner seemed natural. Tom was part of their team now, and Chris enjoyed his company. But soon, Ashley was inviting him over almost every night. What once felt casual now seemed deliberate. Chris couldn't ignore the nagging feeling creeping into his mind. Something was shifting, something he didn't want to acknowledge. Chris had noticed some tension in his relationship with Ashley, but tried to chalk it up to stress and exhaustion. After Tom's frequent visits to their home, Chris decided to bring it up gently, expressing his wish for more one-on-one time with Ashley. She seemed surprised and a bit distant, but agreed to tone it down. However, Chris began to notice a shift in her behavior, not just with Tom, but with him as well. She seemed colder, less affectionate, and withdrew from intimacy. He told himself it was just a phase, perhaps due to work stress, but his unease grew. He began to observe her more closely. Every time Tom was around, Ashley's demeanor changed. Her tone softened, her eyes sparkled a little brighter, and she laughed more freely. At first, Chris didn't think much of it, but soon he realized it wasn't just friendliness. Her increasing invitations for Tom to join them for dinner became frequent, and he couldn't ignore the growing discomfort inside him. One night, unable to hold back, Chris directly asked Ashley if something was going on. Her response was vague, brushing it off as stress. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As the days went by, Ashley became more distant, avoiding deep conversations, staying late at the gym, and acting suspicious when he entered her office. Chris didn't want to believe the worst, but his anxiety grew with every passing day. It all began innocently enough. When Tom first joined the gym, Ashley treated him like any other employee. But as Chris was busy with his own responsibilities, Ashley took it upon herself to help Tom settle in. Their conversations started as professional, but gradually became more personal. Tom was a great listener, and before long, Ashley found herself confiding in him about things she usually only shared with Chris. Tom had a way about him that was hard to ignore. His compliments felt genuine and effortless, making Ashley smile in a way she hadn't in a while. What started as casual work-related chats evolved into deeper conversations. And soon, Ashley realized she was sharing more with Tom than she had intended. One evening, when Chris was occupied with training, Ashley and Tom found themselves alone in her office. The soft light and relaxed atmosphere set the stage for a more intimate conversation. Tom asked her if she was happy, and though she responded affirmatively, something about his question lingered in her mind. His attention and care seemed so genuine, and when he placed his hand over hers, she felt a wave of emotion. Tom's words about her devotion to Chris and how she deserved more stirred something inside her. For the first time, Ashley felt truly seen and appreciated in a way she hadn't in a long time. The connection with Tom, though innocent at first, began to blur the lines of her marriage. Ashley's feelings for Tom gradually shifted from simple friendship to something deeper. His attention made her heart race, and she began to crave his presence. Though she knew it was wrong, she couldn't resist the pull. Slowly, their conversations became more personal, and Tom became the first person in years to make her feel special, seen as more than just Chris's wife or a gym assistant. His compliments made her feel beautiful again, and before long, she was eagerly awaiting his visits. She found herself avoiding Chris, fearing he would notice the change in her behavior. Ashley tried to convince herself it was just a fleeting attraction, something that would pass. But deep down, she knew it was out of her control. Every glance from Tom, every casual touch felt significant. She was caught in a dangerous spiral, torn between wanting to preserve her marriage and the overwhelming desire to explore her feelings for Tom. One evening, Chris returned to the gym late to pick up some forgotten documents. As he approached, he noticed the lights were still on, which was unusual since he had turned them off. When he reached the door, it was unlocked. His heart began to race as he cautiously entered, hearing faint laughter from inside. As he crept forward, a cold shiver ran down his spine. He reached the gym and froze in the doorway. There, under the spotlight in the ring, were Ashley and Tom, kissing passionately. His breath caught in his throat as he watched them, unable to move or speak. For a moment, he hoped it was just a nightmare, but the harsh reality sank in as he realized what was happening. Tom, the man Chris had trusted, was in his arms, touching his wife in ways Chris could never have imagined. Anger and devastation overwhelmed him as he stood in the dark, unable to tear his eyes away from the betrayal unfolding in front of him. The gym, once a symbol of his recovery and hope, now felt like a hollow, sacred place defiled by the very people he had trusted most. Chris stood there in silence, his heart shattering with each second. Slowly he turned and left, his body feeling heavy as he walked toward the door. The click of the lock echoed loudly in the stillness, and without hesitation, he shut off the lights, plunging the gym into darkness. Inside, Ashley and Tom broke their kiss, startled by the sudden blackness. Tom's voice trembled as he suggested it might be a power failure. They moved through the darkness, attempting to make sense of the situation. When they reached the front door, Tom tried to open it, but it was locked. "Someone locked us out," he said, his voice thick with panic. Ashley's heart raced as she turned to him. "Do you think anyone knows we're here?" she whispered. Tom hesitated, trying to stay calm. "Maybe it's just a coincidence," he said, but Ashley could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The fear in her grew stronger, and she squeezed his hand tightly. "Do we need to call Chris?" she asked, suddenly overwhelmed by the thought of him discovering the truth. Tom didn't respond immediately, but after a long moment, he shook his head. "I don't think we should. It might be nothing." But Ashley knew she couldn't hide from this forever. She had no idea how to face Chris after what had happened. Chris stood outside, his hand gripping the key as he locked the door, feeling a cold sense of control take over. He knew that sooner or later he'd have to confront Ashley and Tom, but for now, he wanted them to experience even a fraction of the pain and betrayal he felt. This gym, once a place of rebirth, had become a symbol of hurt. Anger was slowly replacing the shock and despair he'd felt earlier. With a deep breath, he steeled himself for the confrontation, needing to face the reality of what had just happened. He quietly entered the gym, listening to the muffled voices of Ashley and Tom. They were discussing how to handle the situation, and though they spoke softly, Chris could hear everything. Ashley's voice, tinged with anxiety, caught his attention. "What should we do now, Tom? What if someone saw us?" Tom's response sent a wave of fury through Chris. "Calm down. The main thing is that Chris doesn't find out." With that, Chris snapped. He flipped on the lights, startling both of them. They froze, staring in shock as Chris spoke in a calm but chilling voice. "It's too late. I already know everything." Ashley's face drained of color as she stammered, trying to justify herself, but Chris didn't listen. His gaze locked on Tom, who stood there, defiant and unashamed. "Chris, it's not what you think," Tom began, stepping forward, but Chris's rage overpowered him. He rushed forward and punched Tom squarely in the face, sending him to the ground. Fluid dripped from Tom's lip. "You were my friend," Chris said, towering over him. "I trusted you more than anyone." Tom wiped the fluid away and shot Chris a defiant look. "She wanted it. You were too busy with yourself to notice how unhappy she was." Chris felt a surge of anger and delivered another blow, followed by another, ignoring the pain in his fists. Each punch was filled with his heartbreak and betrayal. Ashley was standing to the side, crying and pleading, but her voice was drowned by Chris's fury. Tom, weakened, tried to fight back, but was no match for Chris's strength, the instinct of a former fighter coming alive again. Finally, Tom collapsed, breathing heavily, his eyes filled with hatred and fear. "You deserve this," Chris said, his voice ragged. "I trusted you. You were like a brother." He turned to Ashley, standing frozen in the corner, her face pale with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why?" he whispered. "What did I do wrong? What made you do this?" Ashley couldn't answer, her sobs the only response as she turned away. Chris walked away from them, the rage slowly draining, leaving only emptiness. You destroyed everything I had. I hope it was worth it, he muttered as he walked out of the gym. In his car, Chris gripped the steering wheel, staring blankly ahead, the weight of betrayal crushing him. The scene replayed in his mind. Ashley in Tom's arms, the image surreal and painful. How had he missed this? When had he become blind to what was happening in his own life? He remembered the early days of their marriage, filled with warmth and love. Ashley had supported him through his darkest times, and he'd believed their bond was unbreakable. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of her. Maybe it was when he immersed himself in the gym, too focused on work to see his wife needed attention, or when he entrusted her with everything, forgetting she needed to feel loved and valued too. The realization hit him hard. He had created the conditions for this betrayal with his inattention. He thought of the times she smiled and laughed with Tom, memories now tainted with pain. His own naivety had made him blind to what was happening right under his nose. He squeezed the steering wheel, his knuckles white, unable to answer the question that kept repeating in his mind. What did I do wrong? He had worked so hard, loved her deeply, but it wasn't enough. His heart was torn, filled with a bitter mix of anger and disgust. He couldn't believe she had done this. How could she choose Tom, knowing the pain it would cause him? How could she betray him like this? The questions swirled in his mind, the rage building as he clenched his fists. Chris sat in his car, consumed by a storm of disbelief and pain. He couldn't understand how Ashley could betray him, destroy everything they had built together. His mind raced, and for the first time, he called her a word he never imagined: traitor. The weight of that realization hit him hard, as he understood that the life he'd known was forever gone. He couldn't undo what had been done, and the uncertainty ahead loomed like a painful void. Ashley returned home the next morning, exhausted and reeling from the events of the night. She'd spent hours at the hospital with Tom, nursing his injuries from Chris's fury. As she pulled into the driveway, she noticed Chris's car, and her heart skipped. She feared the worst. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. She called for him, but there was no response. When she reached their bedroom, she saw the bed unmade and empty, panic rising in her chest. The thought that Chris had already discovered the truth and left hit her like a brick. She spotted a note on the table, her hands trembling as she picked it up. The note was brief and to the point. I know everything. I won't make a scene. You've chosen your path, and I'm no longer a part of it. I'm leaving. Take everything: house, money, property. I hope Tom can give you what I couldn't. Chris. Ashley collapsed to the floor, her tears spilling as she read the words. The reality of what she'd done, the damage she'd caused, consumed her. She never expected Chris to leave without confrontation, quietly slipping away, leaving her with nothing but guilt. Sitting on their bed, Ashley reflected on the months of distance, how she'd let her affair with Tom spiral. She realized how much pain she'd caused Chris, the man who had always been there for her, loving her even when she felt neglected. Now, everything was shattered. The memories of their early days together, love, trust, care, were now lost. After hours of staring into space, Ashley tried calling Chris, but her trembling hands failed to dial. She knew deep down that she'd lost him forever. Now she had to face the consequences of her actions, and the weight of her betrayal was unbearable. In the hospital, Tom's condition deteriorated. He was permanently damaged, physically and emotionally, from the beating Chris had given him. His future was bleak, and his bitterness toward Ashley grew with every passing day. He became angry, blaming her for ruining his life. One evening, as Ashley sat by his bed, trying to comfort him, Tom snapped. "Go away!" he demanded, his anger boiling over. She was startled. "Tom, please, I'm just trying to help." He turned to her, his damaged eye barely able to focus. "It's your fault I'm like this," he hissed. "You ruined me. I lost my job, my health, my future because of you." His words hit her like a slap. She tried to explain, to apologize, but he wouldn't hear it. "Get out, Ashley," he spat. "I don't want anything from you." Feeling completely crushed, Ashley silently left the room. For the first time, she was alone, with no one left to turn to. Chris had left, and now Tom had rejected her. She was trapped in her own guilt and despair. The following days were a blur of guilt and loneliness for Ashley. She wandered through the empty house, overwhelmed by the weight of her actions. Her mind replayed everything: her marriage falling apart, Chris's silent departure, and the ruin of Tom's life. She constantly questioned how she let it all happen, why she didn't stop herself sooner, and why she couldn't appreciate what she had. She tried calling Chris, but his number was disconnected. No one knew where he had gone. It was as if he vanished from her life completely. She was left alone, realizing how much she depended on him, his love, support, and care. Without him, she felt lost and helpless. Days passed, and Ashley withdrew from everything. She refused to see friends or family, locking herself away in her home, a prisoner of her own remorse. As she sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at old photos, it hit her just how wrong she'd been. She had believed she could find happiness in betrayal, and now she was paying the price. She remembered the tenderness in Chris's eyes, his love and loyalty, and realized how cruelly she had treated him. Her life had split into two parts, before and after. She had lived in an illusion of happiness, but now the harsh truth was clear. She couldn't go back, and she had no idea how to move forward. Months passed, and Ashley became a shadow of her former self. Without Chris and after the fallout with Tom, she was empty. She avoided people and hid from her past, trying not to confront the reality of what she'd lost. One day, while at a cafe near the gym, she overheard a conversation that caught her attention. Two men were talking about an underground fighter, known only as the Shadow. He wore a mask, never showed his face, and had never lost a match. Something about the mention of the Shadow sent a chill down her spine. Could it be Chris? The fighter, the passion, it all seemed so familiar. But Chris had retired from boxing. He couldn't risk his health. Curiosity gnawed at her. She began quietly investigating, and the more she learned, the more she began to suspect that this fighter could be Chris. She discovered that these brutal fights took place in an abandoned building on the city's outskirts, drawing people who craved violence and adrenaline. Unable to resist, Ashley decided to attend one of the fights. She dressed in dark clothes and slipped into the crowded, tense hall. The makeshift ring stood in the center, surrounded by a rowdy crowd. When the masked fighter entered, Ashley's heart skipped a beat. His posture, his movements, it was unmistakably Chris. She watched in horror as he fought with terrifying intensity, as if punishing himself. She knew it was him. The fight ended quickly, and the masked fighter left the ring without a glance at his defeated opponent. Ashley, standing in the midst of the cheering crowd, felt tears sting her eyes. This was her doing. Chris was here, risking everything because of her. From that night on, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The image of Chris fighting in the shadows haunted her. Was he really putting his life on the line like this? All because of her mistakes? The thought consumed her. She had driven him to this dark place, and now she was powerless to stop his self-destruction. A few weeks later, Ashley heard rumors that the mysterious fighter would return to the underground ring. She had to go. She needed to see if it was truly Chris. The crowd in the hall was thick and charged with anticipation. Ashley hid in a corner, anxiety gnawing at her as she realized she had driven Chris to this life. The announcer's voice boomed, drawing everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, a fighter whose name we don't know but whose victories are legendary, the Shadow. Ashley's heart raced when the masked fighter entered. His movements, his posture, everything felt so familiar. She knew it was Chris. A mix of fear and bitter joy flooded her. The fighter's opponent was confident, but Ashley could see how calmly Chris waited for the fight to start as if he knew the outcome. The gong rang out, and Chris launched forward with a swift, powerful blow, knocking his opponent down before he even had a chance to react. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Ashley couldn't hear them. Her eyes were fixed on him, on Chris. To her horror, the fighter slowly removed his mask. The crowd cheered again, but Ashley's world froze. It was him, Chris. Their eyes locked, and time seemed to stop. In his gaze, Ashley saw pain, anger, and disappointment, and something even deeper, something irreversible. She froze, unable to move or speak, tears welling up. Chris slowly put the mask back on and walked out of the ring, vanishing into the shadows. Ashley stood there, crushed by the realization that she had lost him, perhaps forever. Back at home, she sat alone in the kitchen, staring at a mug of cold coffee. Memories of her early days with Chris flooded her. She remembered when they first met. His smile, his strength, the way he made her feel safe. Their love had been intense, passionate, and full of promise. But somewhere along the way, she had taken it all for granted. She remembered how she had started to crave attention from Tom, how she had let her dissatisfaction pull her away from Chris. Now, she realized that everything she had destroyed was precious and rare. She had betrayed the one person who truly loved her. The image of Chris's face in the ring haunted her. His pain, his rage, it was all because of her. She had changed him into someone cold and distant, someone she didn't recognize. Ashley closed her eyes, guilt overwhelming her. She had caused this. She had destroyed their love. She wondered if there was any way to fix what she had done, or if it was too late. Could she ever get Chris back? With determination, Ashley decided to find him, to try and explain herself. Even if she didn't deserve his forgiveness, she had to try. She stood near the back exit of the underground club, her hands trembling. Her heart beat loudly in her chest. This was her only chance to reach Chris, to stop him before he destroyed himself completely. The door finally opened, and Chris stepped into view, moving steadily towards her. His expression was unreadable, his eyes locked straight ahead as if he didn't even see her. He almost passed by her, but Ashley, summoning every ounce of strength, stepped into his path. "Chris, please!" Her voice wavered, filled with desperation. "You can't keep doing this. You had a severe head injury. If you keep fighting, you could die." He paused for just a moment, staring straight ahead, his eyes distant and cold, as though her words had no meaning. The warmth she once knew in his gaze was completely gone. Ashley's panic surged as she realized that the man in front of her wasn't the one she knew anymore. "Please!" she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Don't do this! For everything we had, please stop!" Chris lifted his eyes and met hers. For a brief second, it seemed like he might speak, but he remained silent. All she saw was emptiness and coldness. Without a word, he walked around her, continuing on his way as if she were nothing more than a memory he didn't want to face. Her heart shattered, and she stood there feeling completely invisible, abandoned, and lost. Everything she had hoped for was gone. She watched him walk away, knowing that she had just lost him forever. He had become a stranger to her, someone beyond reach, and that realization cut deeper than anything she had ever felt before. Collapsing onto the cold floor, Ashley sobbed, realizing this was her punishment for the mistake she had made. Now, she would have to live with the consequences for the rest of her life. Returning to the house, Ashley felt its cold, alien presence, like the walls themselves rejected her. Every step in the dark hall echoed with her isolation and despair. She threw her coat onto the sofa and sank beside it, powerless. The silence felt suffocating, as though it would choke her. Her tears no longer brought relief, becoming a mere routine of sorrow. Each night she sat alone, trapped in the painful memories of the past. She knew she had lost Chris forever. He would never forgive her. He would never return. The crushing weight of this truth consumed her every day, turning her life into an unending prison. The home that was once filled with love now felt like a place of torment, its walls echoing with accusations of betrayal. Despite all the pain, she couldn't stop attending the underground fights where Chris fought. She stood in the back, fists clenched, silently praying for his survival. Every hit he took or dealt felt like it tore at her own soul. After each fight, she tried again to talk to him, hoping, no, begging, that he would stop, listen, and understand that his life mattered more than the anger he carried. But each time, Chris walked by her as if she didn't exist. His indifference cut deeper with each rejection, making it painfully clear that the man she once loved was gone. In his place was a stranger, cold, unreachable, a man she no longer recognized. After each fight, Ashley returned home more broken than before, yet unable to stop going. It was the only way she could feel connected to him, even from afar. He no longer saw her, but she saw him, and somehow, in her tortured mind, that was enough. One evening, as she sat in the dark, the weight of her hopelessness hit her. Chris would never return. He would never forgive her. She had lost him forever, and now all she could do was live with that knowledge. The house felt darker and heavier. Life felt hollow. Ashley accepted that the punishment she was enduring was deserved. There was no escaping it. This was her burden to bear. She tried repeatedly to start over, to move, to change jobs, but nothing helped. The past always followed her, and every day she relived the loss of Chris, the one person who had truly loved her. One evening, staring at her phone, she was overwhelmed by the urge to text him. Her fingers shook as she started to type, but she knew it was pointless. Chris had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. She set the phone down, the weight of despair settling in. Tears filled her eyes as she gazed at the photographs on the wall. Smiles, love, dreams of a future that would never be. She realized she had destroyed it all with one reckless choice. Chris's love, The one thing irreplaceable in her life was gone. Her days were spent in isolation, pushing everyone away. The nights were the worst. She relived the last conversations, the look in Chris's eyes, pain, disappointment, and the worst of all, indifference. The memories tormented her, stealing her peace and rest. She knew she could never undo what she had done, and that truth felt like a life sentence she would carry forever. Ashley realized that she would have to come to terms with the consequences of her actions. She would live with the weight of guilt and regret, and somehow try to silence the pain. Meanwhile, Chris had long moved on. From the moment he walked away, he erased her from his life. No more pain, no more regret, just emptiness. And he filled that emptiness with his new reality: fighting. Chris had become something unrecognizable, merciless, unrelenting, driven by anger rather than discipline. The ring was no longer a place of honor or skill for him. It was an outlet for his inner torment. He didn't fight for fame or money. He fought to numb the rage and hurt that consumed him. Each fight was a battle not just with his opponent, but with the pain, the betrayal, and the memories that refused to fade. Pain became his escape, his release. It was the only way to silence the noise inside him. Over time, Chris became a feared figure in underground fights. His brutal style earned him a legendary reputation, and his cold indifference terrified even the toughest opponents. But fame meant nothing to him. All he sought was relief from the anger he carried. He cut himself off from the world, refusing to make connections, pushing everyone away. Even thoughts of Ashley faded, swallowed up by the blood and sweat of his battles. Sometimes he couldn't even remember her face, her voice. She had disappeared from his life, a part of his past, a painful mistake that still haunted him. But when the noise of the world settled, when he was alone with his thoughts, memories of Ashley always returned. He remembered the happiness they once shared, the kind of joy he hadn't felt since. Those memories broke through the walls he had built around himself. And when they did, he sought the ring to bury them once more. Fighting had become his escape, his only way to push the past away. Chris lived only in the present, pain. The past no longer mattered, and the future was non-existent. He had accepted this life without regret. The fights were his only reality, the only reason he woke up each day. As long as he felt the pain of his battles, he knew he was still alive, still capable of feeling something, anything, besides the emptiness inside. Ashley stood at the entrance of the underground club, her heart pounding with the weight of the moment. Tonight was her final visit, to see Chris fight one last time and close the door on their past. She had received a job offer in another city, and now she wanted to leave behind everything that reminded her of loss and regret. The crowd was as rowdy as ever, hungry for violence and spectacle. Ashley pushed through, making her way to her usual spot in the back, trying to stay unnoticed. She found Chris almost immediately, his familiar form in the ring, warming up, focused and cold. He looked so different now, so distant. But in the stillness of that moment, she saw the man she once loved, and the pain of it all hit her again. The fight began. Chris's opponent was young and strong, but Chris moved with confidence and skill, his experience evident in every calculated strike. Ashley watched in awe, unable to look away. But then, things went wrong. His opponent found an opening, delivering a brutal blow straight to Chris's head. Ashley's heart stopped. Time seemed to slow as Chris stumbled, struggling to stay upright. And then he collapsed. The room went silent. "Chris!" Ashley's scream cut through the stillness. She pushed through the crowd, her hands shaking as she rushed to his side, falling to her knees beside him. She grabbed his hand, desperately searching for any sign of life. "Chris, please, wake up!" she cried, her voice breaking. But his eyes were vacant, lifeless. Ashley's hands trembled as she cradled his face, willing him to respond. But deep inside, she knew it was too late. "Chris!" she shouted again, but the sound felt hollow, swallowed by the chaos around her. In that moment, something inside her shattered beyond repair. This was her punishment, the ultimate consequence. The man she had betrayed was gone forever, and she was left in a world that no longer made sense. Kneeling there, on the floor, holding his cold hand, Ashley cried. This was the end, their last moment together, and it was too late for anything to change. Now she was truly alone, alone with her guilt, alone with the consequences of a life she had destroyed. Her punishment was cruel and deserved. She would live every day knowing that she had lost the one person who had ever truly loved her. Forever. The night of Chris's death had been the final blow. She had arrived at the underground fight in a desperate attempt to see him, to speak to him, to beg for forgiveness. But the image of him lying unconscious in the ring, his body broken and battered, was too much. She had cried out his name, but he didn't respond. His body lay motionless, his spirit seemingly gone before her eyes. In the days that followed, the weight of his absence suffocated her. The gym remained silent, devoid of the life Chris had once brought to it. His memory lingered in every corner, every punch bag, every echo of a life he had poured his soul into. And she had destroyed it all. She had destroyed him. Ashley couldn't bring herself to leave the gym. She wandered through its empty halls as though waiting for him to walk through the door. But he never would. The realization settled in like a cold, suffocating fog. She was alone. The man she had once loved, the man who had been her world, was never coming back. And it was her fault. She had betrayed him, allowed her own selfish desires to overshadow everything they had built together. In her pursuit of something fleeting with Tom, she had destroyed the most important thing in her life. And now, Chris was dead, a victim of her own weakness, her own inability to appreciate what she had until it was too late. She thought of all the times she had taken him for granted, how he had been there for her, supporting her through every storm, always steady, always strong. She had loved him, but she had failed him. The guilt gnawed at her, twisting in her stomach like a constant ache. She could never undo what had happened. He was gone, and she was left to live in the shadow of her mistakes. The funeral was a blur. Friends, old gym members, and even strangers who had admired Chris's legacy gathered to pay their respects. Ashley stood there, numb, her heart shattered in ways she never thought possible. She could feel his absence in every corner, his presence now just a memory that haunted her every waking moment. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Life, if you could call it that, continued for Ashley. But it was a hollow existence. She wandered through her days, a ghost of the woman she used to be. The weight of her guilt pressed down on her, leaving her incapable of feeling anything but the constant, suffocating emptiness that had replaced everything. She continued to visit the gym, but it no longer felt like home. It was just a place, a reminder of the life she had destroyed. Every time she walked through the door, she half expected Chris to be there, waiting for her with that warm smile of his, the one that had made her feel like everything would be okay. But there was nothing. No Chris, no warmth, just the cold, harsh reality of the life she had ruined. And in the quiet of the gym, as she sat on the bench where he had once sat beside her, Ashley finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she had done. Chris was gone. She would never hear his voice again, never feel his embrace, never see his eyes light up with the same love and understanding that had always been there. He was gone, and all she had now was the relentless ache of regret. She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. In the silence, she whispered a goodbye she never thought she would have to say. She had lost everything, and there was no going back.
I wasn't always a rancher, and the path that led me here was anything but typical. Before the vast open spaces and the endless demands of ranch life became my reality, I lived a completely different life. A life rooted in the East, far from the Rocky Mountain foothills I now call home. Back then, I wore suits, worked with numbers, and lived in the fast-paced world of the city. Walking away from my connections to organized crime wasn't something I ever imagined, but circumstances, and one moment of uncontrollable anger, pushed me into a new life, far from everything I'd known. When I first arrived here, I knew almost nothing about cattle, horses, or the rhythm of the land. But I quickly realized that the hard work and isolation suited me, giving me a way to stay busy and keep my past at a distance. Over time, the ranch became more than just my job. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in daily tasks and escape the shadows of my old life. But the past has a way of catching up, no matter how far you run or how many acres you put between yourself and your old world. I woke up suddenly, drenched in cold sweat. Another nightmare had probably hit, though I couldn't remember the details. Therapy had helped some, but sleep wouldn't come easily now. The bad dreams would just return. A glance at the clock showed 4:30 a.m., not much earlier than when I usually get up. Might as well start the day. Running a ranch means early mornings and long hours, but it's the life I chose and I wouldn't trade it. With 535,000 acres spread out along the foothills, my nearest neighbor was a good 50 miles away, a fact I was always aware of. After a quick shave and shower, I dressed for the day. By the time I was done, I looked the part, a 40-year-old man with graying hair, a weathered face, and the lean, muscular build ranch life gave me. I was no longer the overweight city guy I'd been, now down to a solid 200 pounds from the 260 I carried in the East. Even my Italian heritage seemed to fade under the sun and wind of the Rockies, though I still found myself alone. I just couldn't bring myself to get close to any of the local women. Not that I didn't go into town to have some fun, but I never found a woman I wanted something serious with. One of my ranch hands once told me, "If you wake up with the same woman you had last week, it's time to head into town." So I followed that advice. As I got older, the trips became less frequent, but I guess that happens to everyone. I made coffee and took a cup into my office, planning to start the day a little early. I turned on the TV and tuned into a national news network. I love having my satellite dish. It lets me stay connected to the world while still enjoying the rural life. Plus, my dude ranch guests would go crazy without it. This was a working ranch. We had herds of beef cattle, we bred horses, sheep, and even a few buffalo. After living here for about 5 years, a small family drove up my driveway one day pulling a travel trailer. They asked if they could camp on my land. They earned a lot of points with me just by asking. Most people, inconsiderate pricks that they are, just set up camp without permission. I usually had to send one of my guys to kick them out. I don't know why I said yes this time. Maybe it was because they asked. Maybe it was the hopeful look in their son's eyes. Or maybe I was just in a good mood after breakfast. Whatever it was, I sent one of my hands to help them pick a spot near the stream, under the trees, but close enough to the ranch where they could use electricity, water, and the bathrooms. That evening, there was a knock at my door. The boy stood there with a big plate of cookies, holding them out to me and saying, "Thanks for letting us stay on your land. It's really nice here." I noticed his father standing in the background with a flashlight, a proud dad watching his son grow up. The boy went on about how his mom made the best cookies in the world, pointing out his favorites. I raised my voice so the dad could hear me, thanked the boy, and invited both of them in for milk and cookies. We had a nice time. The boy got me thinking about my own kids. It had been a long time since I'd left, without even saying goodbye. The next morning, I was working some horses in a corral near the main barn when I noticed the father and son watching me. I was due for a break, so I rode over to where they were standing at the fence. The boy immediately reached for the horse's head to pet him. The horse I was on, though, was a mean stallion that would bite anyone who got close. I shouted at the boy not to touch him. He jumped back, eyes welling with tears. I didn't mean to yell so loud and scare him, and I felt awful. I got off the horse, knelt down, and explained that the horse might bite and I didn't want him to get hurt. After I finished, the boy hugged me. Feeling bad, I took him to the barn to see a newborn colt we hadn't let outside yet. She was as gentle as they come, so I let him into the stall to touch her. He asked a million questions about the foal and her mother. I think I made a lifelong friend, because for the next week, the boy was always right by my side. The father apologized for his son's behavior, but I told him, "No problem, I enjoy the company." As the week went on, I bonded with the kid. He was about the same age as my son back east, who I hadn't seen in years. I guess the boy was filling a void I didn't realize I had. The little family stayed for a week, and during that short time, the boy won over all the ranch hands. We were all sad to see them go. That fall, I decided to start a family-oriented dude ranch. There wasn't much to do to prepare, as the ranch already had 6 cabins with electricity and running water. I had my guys clean them up, install water heaters, and make any other necessary improvements. My main house was huge. The dining room seated 30 people, and the living room was just as spacious. I also had a library full of books on Western history, so we were pretty much ready. We'd figure out the rest as we went along. I placed a small ad in a vacation magazine targeting families back east. I got a handful of replies and a few deposits. Not a great start, but it was something. As the first guest's arrival got closer, I called a meeting with my staff. We decided what activities the guests could do on the ranch, which horses were calm enough for them to ride, which chores they could help with, and what the meals would be. We even restored an old wagon and outfitted it as a chuck wagon for an overnight trail ride to give guests a real Old West experience. It slowly picked up, and within a couple of years, we were fully booked all summer. It was nice having families around. It made the ranch feel alive. One morning, as I sat sipping my coffee, I started reflecting on how I ended up on the ranch. It had been a long and winding road. I used to be a bookkeeper for my Uncle Vito, working in a small office above one of his restaurants. You might not think bookkeeping is a big deal, but my uncle was the head of one of the largest crime families on the East Coast. I managed all his money, both legitimate and, well, not so much. I was well respected in the family. One day we had a small kitchen fire and had to evacuate the building. Since I couldn't work, I went home. The garage was open, so I pulled in and entered through the side door. The house was eerily quiet, but I heard a faint noise from upstairs. For some reason, I grabbed my son's baseball bat from near the door and went to investigate. I quietly crept upstairs and entered my bedroom, where the noise was coming from. What I saw there is something I'll never forget. My wife with another man. She didn't even notice me. I started walking across the room when her lover turned his head and saw me. He smirked. It was Tony D'Amico from a rival crime family. An enemy. The look on his face said it all. He was with my wife to humiliate me. I lost control in a moment of anger, and when I came back to my senses, Tony was seriously hurt. I guess a 260-pound guy with a baseball bat can do serious damage. He was gone. My wife was on the floor. It looked like I had struck her too, but she was still breathing. I didn't know what to do, so I called my cousin. He told me to calm down, get in my car, and drive to one of his businesses. He would handle the cleanup. When I arrived, I was put in a car and driven 200, 300 miles west, where we switched cars and continued driving for the next 2 days. We ended up at a small motel outside of Reno, Nevada, for a couple of days while I got my head straight. My handler explained that a cleanup crew had made Tony's body disappear and thrown my wife down the grand staircase, making it look like she had fallen. Then they set fire to the bedroom to destroy any evidence of Tony's passaway. The fire department found my wife at the bottom of the stairs and assumed she had fallen while trying to escape the fire. When I knocked her with the baseball bat, it broke her back. The rough handling she endured afterwards severed her spinal cord at the injury site, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. She lost the ability to use her legs and had no control over her bladder or bowels. I had no sympathy for her after what she did to our marriage. One of her doctors suspected her injuries weren't from a simple fall and wanted to investigate further. However, that doctor quickly dropped the case after acquiring a new cabin cruiser. I assume some of my cousin's associates had a word with him. My 2 children were staying with my elderly parents, who were told that their mother had a boyfriend and that he had hurt her. They believed this explanation because they had overheard her phone calls with Tony. They never asked to visit her in the hospital. That's when my handler dropped the real bombshell. Tony's distant cousin was the don of another crime family, and he had placed a bounty on my head. I could never go home again, and I'd never see my children again. On the last day at the motel, my handler gave me a new briefcase. Inside, I found everything I needed to become Tom Martin. Sam Palmeret no longer existed. My old life was over. I was outfitted in Western clothes, now just another ranch hand. My handler introduced me to another ranch hand, and we drove off in his pickup to start my new life. I snapped back to the present and started my day. It was Monday, and all the guests for the next 2 weeks were due to arrive. That morning, I walked into my office, turned the welcome sign on, powered up my PC, and began the day. Around noon, a limo pulled up to the office. I was outside at the time, and my first thought was, these guests are going to be trouble. People arriving in limos usually were. The back door opened, and 2 teenage kids stepped out. My next thought was, great, spoiled kids with no parents around. I figured they wouldn't last the full 2 weeks. I considered starting a pool with the ranch hands on how long before the kids wanted to leave. They stood around waiting for their luggage, and I thought they looked familiar. But before I could figure it out, one of my regular guests asked me a question. By the time I was done, one of my helpers had already checked the kids in. That evening at dinner, I gave my usual talk about the ranch, explaining what we expected from our guests and what they could expect from us. I reminded them this was a working ranch, not a place that catered to every whim. If they were expecting spa treatments, they were out of luck. But I assured them we'd do everything possible to make their stay unforgettable. I noticed the 2 kids had already made friends with a couple of others and seemed to be getting along. Maybe I'd need to rethink my estimate of their stay. Since this was a working ranch, I spent most of my time actually running it. The ranch hands assigned to the Dude Ranch guests had to be people persons. They loved the customers, and the customers loved them. When they weren't explaining something, they were entertaining guests with tall tales. About a week later, I heard noise coming from one of the smaller barns where we stored hay and grain for the horses. When I went to check it out, I found one of the teenage boys messing around with one of the girls. I understood teenage hormones, but I couldn't let this go on. So I cleared my throat loudly. They weren't having sex, but they were close. I'd been a teenager once, so I knew what was going through their minds. But in this case, I had to act like her father. I gave the boy a hard stare and said, "Get out, boy." I almost laughed as he bolted for the door, hunched over. Then I turned to the girl, gave her the same look, and told her to finish getting dressed and meet me in the study at the main house. We needed to talk. As I walked out of the barn, I tried to figure out how to handle this. I had no experience raising children, let alone a teenage girl. By the time I reached the house, I decided to approach the conversation as a responsible adult. About 10 minutes later, the girl came into the study still crying. I pointed to a chair across from me and asked if she wanted something to drink. I got myself a soft drink. As she shook her head, I kept my voice calm and imagined what I would want someone to say to my daughter in the same situation. I talked to her for about 35 minutes. I must have gotten a bit carried away because during my "save yourself for someone special" speech, she suddenly looked up at me and said, "You've got my grandmother's eyes and my grandpa's voice and mannerisms." The tears started flowing. "Are you my dad, Sam Pomeroy?" I looked into her young face and saw my ex-wife's eyes staring back at me. I remembered those same eyes from when a little girl used to look up at me, reaching out to be held. I said, "I missed you, Danny." The next thing I knew, my daughter Danielle was sitting on my lap, hugging me tightly. We were both crying tears of joy. This was the little girl I never thought I'd see again. She had grown into a beautiful young woman. For the next hour, we sat together, talking and sharing our feelings. Eventually, the conversation turned to my son. She asked me not to say anything to him until she had a chance to talk to him first. She promised she'd speak with him in their cabin after dinner. For the rest of the day, I was completely distracted, wandering around the ranch with my head in the clouds and a goofy grin on my face. The ranch hands couldn't figure out what was going on with me. They knew I hadn't been to town recently and didn't mingle with the guests. After dinner, I was in my office trying to do some paperwork when the door flew open, and a 15-year-old whirlwind rushed in, shouting, "My dad!" The next thing I knew, we were standing in the middle of my office, hugging each other like our lives depended on it. Sammy Jr. had grown into someone I was proud of. The next morning, I grabbed the special cell phone, saddled a horse, and rode out into the hills. I needed some privacy to have a conversation with my Uncle Vito. His son answered the phone, and I said, "Hi, cuz." He hesitated for a moment before replying, "Hi, cubby," with a smile in his voice. Suddenly, we were both talking at once, like a couple of excited kids. Once we calmed down, I told him about my children and asked why they had been put in danger by being sent to me. My cousin explained it had been his father's idea and that he'd put Uncle Vito on the phone. When my uncle came on, he sounded old and tired, but I could hear genuine happiness in his voice. He told me that Don Angelo had died. Since Don Angelo had no one to take over his empire, the council divided it up, with the largest portion going to my uncle. As a result, Uncle Vito lifted the bounty on my head, and it was now safe for me to return home. I paused for a moment, taking in what he said. "Uncle, I've built a life out here. I'm settled now. I can't just leave everything." I promised to come home for Thanksgiving and stay through New Year's. I thanked him for the gift of my children and told him that they would stay with me until school started, if they wanted to. On my way back to the house, the phone rang again. It was my cousin. He explained that my uncle's health was failing, and this would likely be his last holiday with us. My uncle had terminal cancer. I promised to be there for the holidays. That night, I had the housekeeper open up 2 of the extra bedrooms in the main house. I only used the master suite and had closed off the other 6 bedrooms. But now I needed them. The next day, while my kids were busy playing rancher, I had all their belongings moved into their new rooms. When they came running into my office later that day, shouting that someone had stolen their stuff, I just smiled and pointed upstairs. "You've been relocated," I told them. They dashed upstairs to check out their new rooms, and after some noise from the second floor, they came back down smiling. They asked why I had gone to the trouble of moving their things when they were supposed to go back east the next weekend. I explained my phone call with Uncle Vito and told them that if they wanted, they could stay until school started. Their faces lit up. They were thrilled. They said the rooms were beautiful, but wanted to pick up a few things in town to personalize them. I tried to resist, but it was 2 against 1. So I gave in and told them, fine, you can take one of the pickups into town tomorrow. As they left for town, I started having second thoughts. I could already imagine the back of that truck piled high when they returned. Sure enough, the truck wasn't completely full, but they had given it their best shot. They told me to stay out of their rooms until they had finished fixing them up, and I didn't see them again for the next couple of days. When the big reveal finally arrived, they marched me upstairs, making me promise not to peek. I had to keep my eyes closed, and when I opened them, I saw the usual teenage stuff. My son's room had posters of sports stars and cars, and somehow he had managed to sneak in a Sports Illustrated swimsuit poster. His sister gave it a disapproving glance and muttered something under her breath that sounded like, "witches." I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't about to get involved, especially since I liked the poster myself. When we got to my daughter's room, it was clear that it had all the feminine touches. This was definitely a young woman's room. As I looked around, I noticed a large framed photo of me on her nightstand, just like the one on her brother's. Her desk was also decorated with framed photos of me, all taken on the ranch. Both of them had told me they wanted my face to be the first thing they saw in the morning and the last thing at night. I felt a lump in my throat. I'd missed so many years with my kids. Over the next few months, we talked about everything that had happened during the 10 years I'd been absent from their lives. One night, when we had run out of things to talk about, they asked me about their mother and why I had left. I had dreaded that moment since the day we reunited, but I knew I had to tell them the truth. I started by recounting that day, leaving work early because of the fire, finding their mother in bed with her lover, losing control, and liquidating him with a baseball bat. I explained how I regretted that act of violence and called my cousin to take care of the situation. I told them how I was given a new identity and told I could never return. My son looked at me and said, "I'm glad she went crazy and ended up in a mental hospital. I never want to see her again after what she did." My daughter sat there, looking sad. I made a mental note to ask Uncle Vito about my ex when I visited to get some closure, as part of me still missed her. But summer came to an end before we were ready, and the kids and I knew it would be nearly 3 months before we'd see each other again. We promised to call and email, but it wasn't the same as seeing their faces every day. Time seemed to crawl, and even though I'd like to say it didn't, those 3 months felt like years. When the time finally came, my whole crew took me to the airport to see me off. They knew most of the story about my divorce and separation from my kids, but they didn't know about the violence or my ties to organized crime. All they knew was that I was eager to see my children again. I arrived back east earlier than expected. I had told the kids I'd be there on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, but I came a week early. My crew had gotten tired of me moping around the ranch, so they moved everything up and practically shoved me onto the plane. When I reached the gate of my uncle's compound, I pressed the intercom button. A gruff voice responded with a simple, "Yeah?" I asked if my cousin was home and got a maybe in return. So I told him, "Tell him Cub's here." Not 2 minutes later, my cousin came running out, yelling for the gate to be opened. The guards must have thought we were nuts, standing in the middle of the driveway, hugging and calling each other every 4-letter word we could think of. Then my kids joined in the hug. By that point, my cousin and I had cleaned up our language. As I looked up, I saw my uncle sitting in the doorway, in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse. He was a shadow of his former self. I broke away from the group hug and went over to him, wrapping my arms around him. "It's good to be home again. Thanks for making this possible," I said quietly. I looked into his face and saw tears in his eyes. I whispered, "Tough guys don't cry, Uncle. You were always a chicken." His smile brightened his face. "Don't tell anyone," he replied. Later, when we were alone, my cousin told me it was the best his dad had looked in months. He didn't want to know what I whispered, but thanked me for making his father a little happier. We celebrated Thanksgiving with all the family there, close to 400 people in the party house. My cousin thanked everyone for coming and talked about the year ahead. When my uncle was handed the microphone, he spoke a few words about the importance of family. All the men stood and toasted him while the rest applauded. I could tell my uncle was moved, but he couldn't show it. I got up, walked over, took his hand, and was about to speak when he pulled it away, saying into the microphone, "I don't hold hands." That cracked everyone up. There was nothing left for me to do but follow tradition and kiss him on both cheeks. When I finished, he was smiling from ear to ear. I guess he had the last laugh. On Christmas, we celebrated with just the immediate family. My uncle was too weak for anything big. We spent New Year's Day in the hospital, watching him slowly lose his battle with cancer. He passed away on January 5th, peacefully in his sleep. I hoped he'd find his wife again, who had passed 6 years before. When we walked into the funeral home a few days later, I was amazed. The entire place was reserved for him. Flowers filled every corner, and the line of people waiting to pay their respects stretched around the block. It was freezing outside in January, but the mourners were offered hot drinks and sandwiches, a thoughtful gesture that everyone appreciated, though I wasn't sure who had arranged it. The funeral was held at the largest church in the area, with the bishop himself leading the mass. The church was packed to the brim, and the graveside service was no different. I felt a lump in my throat as I watched the casket being lowered into the ground, right next to his wife. They were together again. My children stood by my side throughout, and their eyes were rarely dry. My uncle had been like a father to them after their grandparents passed. Even though they had me back in their lives, they would still miss him. After the funeral, my daughter seemed down for a few days. When I asked her what was wrong, she simply said, "Can we visit Mom?" I had hoped I'd never have to see my ex again. The last time I saw her, she was with my enemy, and the memory was still painfully fresh. But I swallowed my emotions and told my daughter I'd arrange the visit. I asked my son if he wanted to come along. "Hell no," he replied. "I never want to see her again." I made a mental note that he might need help dealing with his feelings about his mother. A few weeks later, my daughter and I pulled up to a state facility. I had learned from my cousin that my uncle had refused to pay for her care, blaming her for everything that had happened to me. She had been declared a ward of the state and was living in a state hospital receiving minimal care. We were directed to a doctor's office inside the facility where my ex-wife's care provider was supposed to meet us. After what felt like forever in the waiting room, my daughter and I were finally shown into his office. Sitting across from us was an Asian man with broken English, a patient folder in front of him that he explained contained my wife's medical history. On his desk sat a towering stack of patient folders, about 18 inches high. I asked, "Are all of these your patients?" He nodded, replying, "Yes, we are short-handed." At that moment, I realized he had no idea who my wife was. I asked him directly, "Does my wife still take her daily run?" Without missing a beat, he said, "Of course." I squeezed my daughter's hand to stop her from exploding. My ex-wife had been paralyzed from the waist down for 14 years. Running wasn't exactly something she was capable of. I requested to visit her ward, so we called an orderly to escort us. When we arrived, we were met by the head nurse, who seemed far more familiar with my ex-wife's condition. She explained that my ex had completely withdrawn, hadn't spoken in almost 12 years, and had developed extreme paranoia, isolating herself in an attempt to protect herself from imagined threats. The nurse took us to the day room where my ex-wife was seated. I barely recognized her. Once a beautiful woman at 5'6" and 110 pounds, she now weighed nearly 300, her hair unkempt and stringy, confined to a wheelchair. Her face had the distant, vacant look often seen in the severely mentally ill. My daughter approached her, speaking softly, but it was clear that nothing was registering. I could see the heartbreak in my daughter's eyes as she tried to reach her mother. I went to comfort her, but just then, my ex's eyes locked on mine. For a brief moment, there was a flash of recognition, and then she started screaming at the top of her lungs, thrashing her arms as if trying to fend off an unseen attacker. 2 orderlies rushed over to restrain her, and the nurse administered a sedative, which knocked her out cold. The nurse turned to me and said, "That's the first time she's reacted to anything in 5 years." She took our contact information and promised to call if there were any changes. As we left that depressing institution, my daughter broke down in the car, crying uncontrollably. I could barely hold myself together. On the way back to my uncle's compound, I promised her that I would look into transferring her mother to a private facility closer to the ranch. While I told myself I was doing it for my daughter, part of me sought closure too. After returning to the ranch, I started my search and eventually found a well-respected mental health facility about 100 miles away. I visited the place, and it looked promising. The doctors and staff were professional and genuinely cared for their patients. The head doctor was someone who had helped me with my nightmares years ago, and we sat down to discuss my ex-wife's condition. I told him about her violent reaction when she saw me at the state hospital. The doctor wasn't pleased by her outburst, but it confirmed that she had some awareness of what was happening around her, even if it was buried deep. He believed that with time and proper care, she might make some progress. We arranged for her transfer, and I called my daughter with the good news. This time her tears were of relief. A couple of months passed, and the doctor called to ask if I could send a photo of myself. When I asked why, he said he'd explain later. I sent an 8x10 photo of me taken at the ranch. Life got busy. Between helping my daughter visit colleges and settling both kids back at the ranch, I forgot about the picture. One day, the doctor called again and asked if he could visit the ranch to talk to me in person. I agreed, and we set a date. When he arrived, we decided to ride out to one of the high meadows to take in the view. On the way, we made small talk, but I sensed he had something heavy on his mind. Once we dismounted and sat in the grass, enjoying the quiet, he broke the silence. "We've been making progress with your wife," he said. "She's lost about 100 pounds, and she's becoming more aware of her appearance. She's starting to ask the nurses to brush her hair. She still doesn't speak, but she'll point to a brush when she wants her hair done." He paused before continuing. "However, when we show her the picture of you, she starts screaming, 'He's going to eliminate me too,' and she goes into a frenzy. We usually have to sedate her." He looked at me, waiting for a response, and then asked, "Is there any truth to her fear? Is there something I need to know?" I sat in silence for a long time, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, I made up my mind. "I'll tell you everything," I said. "But first, I need to know, if I tell you, will it stay between us?" He assured me it would be fine, so I began telling the whole story. I explained that I grew up in a crime family, with my uncle as the Don. While I wasn't involved in the violence, I was the trusted bookkeeper, handling all the money, legal and illegal. My wife knew everything. Then I told him about coming home early one day to find her in bed with Tony, my enemy. Tony's smug look enraged me, and I snapped. I grabbed a bat and started striking him. I don't remember do it, Tommy wife, but when I came to, she was on the floor, bruised. I explained how my cousin's crew made Tony disappear, staged my wife's fall, and started a fire to cover it up. They made it look like an accident, and the fire department found her at the bottom of the stairs. After I finished, the doctor listened quietly. He eventually spoke, saying my blind rage made sense, and I had probably blocked out hitting my wife to protect myself. He suggested that in my case it might be best not to dig up those memories, but warned me to watch for certain signs and call him if they appeared. We talked more, and I mentioned my son's anger toward his mother. The doctor suggested bringing him in to talk and work through it. Later, as we rode back to the main house, he advised me to stay away from my ex-wife for now, but encouraged my daughter to visit her often. Life moved on. My daughter was in college, studying pre-med, and my son was in his freshman year, planning to join me on the ranch. Then I started hearing a lot about Bill. My daughter talked about him all the time, so I casually suggested she invite him to Thanksgiving dinner. An hour later, she called and asked if Bill could stay with us since his parents were traveling for the holidays. I agreed, already knowing what was happening. When they arrived, I was pleasantly surprised. Bill was polite, about 6 feet tall, with sandy hair, brown eyes, and studying to be a surgeon. I liked him, and so did the ranch hands, who started teasing me about becoming Gramps. By Valentine's Day, they were engaged, and the wedding was set for August. Soon, I found myself in a church foyer, waiting nervously for my daughter to arrive. The priest reassured me, "They're always late." When she finally walked down the aisle, I was overwhelmed. She looked beautiful, and all my nerves vanished. As I led her to Bill, I noticed a wheelchair in the front row and realized it was my ex-wife, sitting with Dr. Howie. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen her since the hospital. My daughter squeezed my arm and whispered, "It's okay, Daddy." I invited her. I nodded, feeling a swirl of emotions. As I passed my ex-wife, I saw she was calm, fragile, but no longer angry. Dr. Howie gave me a reassuring smile, and I realized how far things had come. When the priest declared them husband and wife, I teared up, and I noticed my ex-wife crying too. The emotions were clearly overwhelming her. I tried to move aside to avoid blocking her view, but Dr. Howie grabbed my arm and whispered, "Don't touch her yet. She's still fragile." Later at the reception, I danced with my daughter, and she said, "Mom's come a long way, hasn't she?" I nodded, admitting I was proud of her. The bitterness I once felt had softened, and seeing her at the wedding, knowing what she had been through, made me realize how time heals even the deepest wounds. I decided to call Dr. Howie the next week to check in. When we spoke, he explained my ex-wife's progress, noting that attending the wedding was a major step forward. He said, "You could have set her back years just by touching her, but sitting near you was a huge breakthrough." I asked how he got her to accept being in the same room as me. He explained that it started with a photo I had sent him, which he slowly moved closer to her over months. Eventually, she could talk about me, and that led to her attending the wedding. He also shared that she had started to remember the day with Tony, recalling how he used her as a shield. This realization helped her process what happened, and while she's still afraid of me on some level, she no longer believes I meant to eliminate her. She's working through it. I asked, "So she's not there yet, but she's making progress?" Dr. Howie confirmed, "Yes, but you need to be patient. There's still a long journey ahead." Weeks later, my daughter called and asked if her mother could join us for Thanksgiving. She reassured me that Dr. Howie thought it would be good for her, so I agreed, on the condition that Dr. Howie and his wife joined too. When Thanksgiving came, my ex-wife arrived looking much better, though the room felt tense at first. Gradually, she joined some conversations, and I kept my distance to avoid adding any stress. At dinner, I was asked to give the blessing. As I prayed, I included a special request for my ex-wife's healing. When I glanced at her, she smiled at me for the first time in years. It was small and hesitant, but it was there. My daughter cried, and my son seemed stunned. After dinner, as I rested in the living room, I felt someone near me. I peeked and saw my ex-wife by my side, staring at my hand. After a few moments, I felt the lightest touch, and then it was gone. It returned, this time firmer. I didn't move, not wanting to disrupt whatever small connection we were making. Eventually, she pulled away, and I saw Dr. Howie talking gently with her, holding her hands. That night, after everyone had left, I had a conference call with Dr. Howie and my daughter. We agreed that my ex-wife was making great progress, so we decided she could spend Christmas Eve and Christmas Day at the ranch. Dr. Howie couldn't attend, but he put my daughter in charge of her care and advised me to let my ex initiate any contact. When Christmas Eve arrived, I was anxious and tried to stay busy around the ranch. Suddenly, my ex-wife called my name, and I cautiously approached. She softly said, "Please don't be afraid of me. I know you never meant to hurt me. Can we be friends again?" I nodded, fighting back tears, and she gently wiped them away. My daughter and son witnessed it and seemed relieved. Later that night, my ex-wife needed help getting to bed. When I offered to find someone to assist her, she asked me to do it. Hesitant at first, I lifted her from the wheelchair, and she wrapped her arms around me, almost like a hug. After settling her in bed, she didn't want to let go right away. Eventually, she released me, and I tucked her in. As I leaned down to kiss her goodnight, she turned her head, offering only her cheek. I realized I had pushed things too far. That night, I had the strange feeling she had wheeled herself into my room while I slept. The next morning, I found her at the top of the stairs, waiting for help. She raised her arms and whispered, "Please," so I carried her down to breakfast. The room fell silent, but the moment passed quickly. Later, we gathered around the Christmas tree, our first holiday together in 17 years. I noticed my ex-wife sitting among piles of gifts, quietly crying. My daughter walked over and said, "Mom, we've got 17 years of gifts to catch up on." My ex-wife smiled and returned to opening her presents. During dinner, she shyly asked if she could spend New Year's with us too. I quickly said yes, and she gave me a hug, whispering, "Thank you." We spent a wonderful week together, and after everyone left, it was just the two of us at the ranch. On her last night, a storm knocked out the power, and she came to my room, saying her room was freezing. She asked if she could sleep with me. I don't remember saying yes, but suddenly, she was beside me. She laid out some rules. No sex, no kissing, but cuddling was allowed. I wrapped my arms around her and she said, "I've missed your smell. It's the smell of a real man." We talked quietly for hours, and the next morning, due to the snowstorm, she stayed an extra day. I noticed she wasn't as helpless as she seemed, moving easily between the wheelchair and furniture. When I asked her about it, she admitted, "I just wanted to feel your arms around me again." Later that afternoon, Dr. Howie called and talked to her for over 2 hours. I overheard parts of the conversation and realized that in all our years together, she had never opened up to me like she did with him. When she passed me the phone, Dr. Howie said, This is the best I've seen her in years, but there's one more issue she needs to face before she can truly move forward. I asked what it was, but he only said, "She'll tell you when she's ready." I waited, and 2 weeks before Easter, I got the call. It was my ex-wife asking if she could join us for Easter at the ranch because she had something important to share. I agreed, and a few days before the holiday I picked her up from the hospital. She looked exhausted, weighed down by something heavy. We spent the afternoon at the ranch, surrounded by blooming wildflowers, sharing a quiet moment as if we had never been apart. That night she asked to sleep with me again, saying, "I miss being held by you." Later, I woke to her moving beside me. When I tried to stop her, she whispered, "I need to do this for you." And she started crying. As I tried to comfort her, she reminded me of the no kissing rule. Then, she opened up. She told me how Tony had manipulated her using pills, gaining complete control. She had mental health struggles for years, and Tony used them against her, making her dependent to him like a pill. She described the night I found them together, saying she didn't know I was there until Tony used her as a shield to protect himself from my blows. She remembered the pain in her back and being pushed to the floor before blacking out, waking only when a fireman rescued her from the burning house. The doctors had told her that night caused the spinal injury that led to her paralysis, and it triggered a mental breakdown that lasted for 14 years. Then she revealed the biggest shock. Tony or one of his associates had given her HIV, which had progressed to AIDS due to her lack of care during her years of madness. The doctors could only keep her comfortable now, and she told me she wouldn't make it to next Christmas. We cried together all night, and the next day, we shared the news with the family. On Easter morning, we attended Mass together, seeking God's help in the difficult days ahead. In October, she passed away peacefully. She had requested to be cremated and for her ashes to be spread under a large oak tree near the hospital, where she and Dr. Howie had their conversations that brought her back from the darkness. It was a special place for her. The following spring, I had a marble bench installed beneath the oak tree with a plaque that included her name, dates, and the words, "The world was a little better while she was here." I visited that bench often, sitting in the quiet and reflecting on all that had happened. Sometimes I'd play golf with Dr. Howie and catch up on life, and afterward I'd stop by the hospital, sit on the bench, and update her on what the family was up to. Despite everything, I realized I had always loved her. One day I got a call from my daughter and son-in-law. They had exciting news. I was going to be a grandfather. As I sat on the bench under that oak tree, I couldn't help but smile. Life had come full circle. A few years later, my son, who was in his senior year of college, called me up. "Dad, do you mind if I bring a friend home for Thanksgiving?" he asked. He's studying to be a vet, and he'd love to see the ranch. It was the first time since he left for school that he'd made such a request, so I happily agreed. The week before Thanksgiving, I saw my black H2 Hummer pull into the driveway. That Hummer was my pride and joy, and it had its own story. Months earlier, I had found my son's subcompact parked in the garage, but my truck was gone. There was a note in the compact: "Needed more cargo space. Took your truck. Love, Sam." I spent the whole day grumbling, but then I remembered how bad the Hummer's gas mileage was and realized my son had outsmarted himself. Still, I let it go. He's my only son, after all. When the Hummer stopped near where I was standing, my son hopped out, and the passenger door opened. I was stunned. Out stepped one of the most beautiful redheads I'd ever seen. She was about 5'6", with striking green eyes. My son took her hand and walked her over to me. I found myself staring into Shauna's eyes as my son introduced us. Over the next few days, I got to know her. She was an only child raised by her divorced mother. Her father had left them for a younger woman when she was young, leaving them with nothing but debt. Despite it all, Shauna had worked hard, earned a scholarship, and maintained a 3.8 GPA while working as a waitress to support herself. I was proud my son had found such an intelligent, hard-working young woman. Over Thanksgiving, the two of them spent their days looking over the livestock, but I suspected they were growing closer in other ways too. Before they left, Shauna received an invitation to spend Christmas with us, and I couldn't have been happier. I felt like she already belonged in the family. A couple of days later, my son called with a problem. "Shauna really wants to spend Christmas with us, but she doesn't want her mom to be alone. What should we do?" For me, the solution was obvious. I told him to invite her mom to spend the holidays at the ranch, too. We had plenty of space, and if she didn't want to stay in the main house, we had plenty of guest houses for the Dude Ranch visitors. A week later, everything was set. I arranged for her mom to have a first-class ticket to the nearest airport, and Shauna and my son would pick her up and drive to the ranch together. When the day came for them to arrive, I found myself outside, waiting with excitement. My daughter and her family had also just arrived, so we all gathered in the driveway. Shauna hopped out of the front seat, followed by her mom from the back. I was speechless. Shauna's mom, Bridget, was a slightly older version of her daughter, red hair, green eyes, and the kind of beauty that comes with age. I stood there dumbfounded until my daughter walked up and whispered, "Dad, close your mouth. You're embarrassing us." I snapped out of it and walked over to greet Bridget. She gave me a dazzling smile. My daughter handed her baby, Amanda, to Bridget, probably because she didn't trust me to hold my granddaughter in my days. The 2 weeks flew by. I took Bridget on tours of the ranch. She had owned a horse before her divorce and was a skilled rider, so I matched her with a gentle mare, and we toured the ranch together. She loved the views and the animals, and we talked about our lives and families as we rode. By the time she left, I felt like I knew her better than most couples know each other after decades of marriage. We chatted like old friends. After everyone left, the ranch felt empty. Even though I had 15 employees, I couldn't wait for spring break when the kids would return. Bridget said she didn't think she could get time off to visit. When the kids arrived for spring break, I made a call to the doctor Bridget worked for. "Any way I can make sure Bridget gets some time off?" I asked. "I don't see why not," he replied. "I'd be happy to help." We agreed that I would cover her salary for 2 weeks and pay for a temp to replace her. I also called my cousin to borrow his plane. Who said crime doesn't pay? When it was time for her flight, I called Bridget and told her, "The schedule has changed. You'll need to bring your luggage to work, and a car will pick you up and take you to the airport." Later that day, a chauffeur in uniform walked into Bridget's office and asked, "May I take your luggage, Miss Bridget?" He then escorted her to a stretch limo. As they drove off, her coworkers stood in the doorway, stunned, with their mouths open. Bridget called me. "Is this your doing?" she asked, half laughing, half in disbelief. "Maybe," I replied, amused. She was still thanking me when the limo pulled up next to my cousin's Gulfstream. The chauffeur introduced her to the pilot, who then escorted her onto the plane. Her cell phone was still connected to me, but she had gone silent. All I could hear were soft sobs. I waited until the plane's signal cut off before hanging up. I think she was impressed. A year earlier, my cousin had complained about the long trip from the nearest airport to my ranch. "You need an airstrip on your property," he said, half joking. I thought about it and decided he was right. We found a suitable spot on my land, and about a month later, construction began. A few months after that, I had a 10,000-foot runway with all the trimmings and a large hangar for the plane. When I called my cousin to ask, "What's my share of the cost?" he just laughed and said, "Don't worry about it." That's where I was, sitting in my pickup, when the plane landed and Bridget stepped out. She immediately started bombarding me with questions. "How did you pull all this off? What's going on?" she asked, wide-eyed. I laughed and promised, "I'll explain everything after dinner." That night, after dinner, we sat in my study. I had a small fire going and we were sipping brandy. I began telling her the story. "I was raised by one of the largest crime families on the East Coast," I admitted, watching her face for a reaction. "I wasn't involved in the family business, but I enjoyed many of the benefits. The jet you just flew on is one of those perks." Bridget paused for a moment before asking, "Were you ever involved in any of their activities?" "No," I said firmly. I stayed out of it, but I couldn't deny the privileges. She asked a few more questions, mostly to understand my moral boundaries. After a while, she seemed satisfied with my answers. Without a word, she walked over and sat next to me on the couch, resting her head on my shoulder. We stayed like that until we were too tired to stay awake, and then went to our separate rooms. The next morning, she was back to her usual self. At Easter dinner, I made a mistake. I casually asked my son, "Did you take Shauna to meet your mother at the hospital?" I heard Bridget's fork drop suddenly. I glanced at her and gave her a look that said, "We'll talk later." She didn't finish her meal. That night, I brought her into my study. She sat as far away from me as she could, hugging herself, clearly hurting. "Bridget," I began softly, "I need to tell you everything. I don't want to have any secrets between us." She nodded but stayed silent. I started talking, and for the next 2 hours, I told her everything. I explained the cheating, my ex falling down the stairs to escape the fire and breaking her back, her paralysis, and her descent into madness. I told her how I ran away, started the ranch, and eventually reconnected with my children. I described how we found their mother in a state institution, neglected, and how I arranged to have her transferred to a private hospital where she received proper care. I explained how she regained some sanity with the help of a kind doctor, and how she ultimately passed away from AIDS, contracted from her lover. By the time I finished, tears were running down my face. Bridget rushed into my arms, saying, "You're a wonderful man. I think I could love you." She was crying too, and I held her tightly. After a moment, I asked, "Would you like to come with me sometime to visit my ex-wife's grave?" 3 days later, we made the trip to the hospital. We sat on a bench all afternoon, talking about our lives and updating my ex in spirit. On the way back, Bridget never let go of my hand. I knew then that our relationship couldn't continue as we wanted. While the feelings were real, acting on them would complicate things. We never became lovers. Sometimes you just need someone to share your feelings with. We were content with that. Life goes on.